My 12-year-old heard through the window. I smiled and took notes. The next meeting's agenda. The majority property owner requests a discussion about community standards. What Patricia Hendricks didn't know was that I owned 14 of the 27 houses in Meadowbrook Estates, including the one she was currently renting. Let me explain how I got here. 10 years ago, I was a single mother working 3 jobs in Phoenix. My daughter Emma was 2, and I was surviving on coffee and determination. I cleaned houses during the day, did medical billing from home in the evenings, and drove for a rideshare service on weekends. Sleep was optional. One of the houses I cleaned belonged to an elderly investor named Dorothy Chin. She was sharp as a tack at 78, and she liked that I actually moved her furniture to vacuum underneath instead of just pushing it around like the other cleaners did. "You're thorough," she'd observed one afternoon watching me work. "That's rare." We started talking. She asked about my life. I told her the abbreviated version: young divorce, baby, struggling to make ends meet. She nodded like she'd heard it before. "What would you do if money wasn't an issue?" she asked. "Buy a house," I'd answered immediately. "Something with a yard for Emma. A good school district. Somewhere safe." Dorothy had smiled. "Good answer. Most people say they'd quit working. But you want to build something." 6 months later, Dorothy offered me a deal that changed my life. "I'm getting too old for this," she'd said over tea in her immaculate kitchen. "I've got 42 rental properties across Phoenix, and I need someone to manage them. Someone I trust. Someone who actually gives a damn." The salary she offered was triple what I was making from all 3 jobs combined. But there was more. "You do this right for 5 years," Dorothy continued, "and I'll sell you 10 properties at half their market value. Call it an investment in someone who'll do things properly." I'd taken the job. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life. I learned everything: property management, real estate law, tenant relations, renovation costs, market analysis. Dorothy was a demanding teacher, but a fair one. Emma grew up visiting properties with me, learning to assess a house's bones, understanding the difference between a bad tenant and someone just having a bad month. By the time she was 7, she could spot a good investment from the curb. True to her word, 5 years later Dorothy sold me 10 properties at half price. I took out loans for the rest, leveraged everything I had. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Then Dorothy died 6 months after that, and her will contained another surprise. She'd left me 12 more properties, along with a letter. "You reminded me of myself at your age," she'd written. *, hungry, smart, and willing to work. "These houses are yours because I know you'll treat tenants fairly and build something sustainable. Don't let people underestimate you. And don't apologize for your success." I'd cried reading that letter. Over the next 5 years, I carefully expanded. I bought distressed properties, renovated them, either rented or sold them depending on the market. I made good decisions and a few bad ones. I learned from both. 3 years ago, Meadowbrook Estates came on my radar. It was a planned community in Scottsdale, built in the early 2000s, starting to show its age. The original developer had gone bankrupt, and properties were selling below market value. The HOA was a mess: mismanaged funds, deferred maintenance, neighbors suing neighbors. I saw potential. Good bones. Excellent school district. Close to my other properties. I started buying. Quietly. Through my LLC, Skyline Property Management. I bought foreclosures. I bought from overwhelmed landlords. I bought from elderly couples downsizing. Within 18 months, I owned 14 houses in Meadowbrook Estates. I renovated them carefully: good tenants, reasonable rents, professional management. I joined the HOA, paid my dues, attended a few meetings. I kept a low profile. Then I moved into one of my own houses. Emma was 10 and needed stability. She needed friends and a real home, not just the apartment we'd been renting near my office. So I picked the best house I owned, a 4-bedroom at the end of Maple Drive, and we moved in. I kept driving my 2008 Honda Civic because it ran perfectly fine. I kept wearing my work clothes, jeans and t-shirts, practical and comfortable. I kept my schedule: up at dawn checking on properties, home by 3 to get Emma off the bus, evenings doing paperwork. I didn't announce that I owned half the neighborhood. Why would I? It wasn't anyone's business. But Patricia Hendricks had opinions. Patricia lived across the street in a house she rented from a small-time landlord I didn't know yet. She drove a white BMW, wore designer workout clothes to walk her tiny dog, and had made herself the unofficial social coordinator of Meadowbrook Estates. She'd introduced herself the week we moved in, looking past me like she was expecting someone more impressive to appear. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure you'll find it very aspirational." I'd recognized the code immediately. She thought we didn't belong. The judgments started small. Comments about my car. "Still driving that old Honda?" "Well, reliability is important when you're on a budget." Observations about my yard. "I suppose some people prefer a natural look." Questions about my profession delivered with fake concern. "Property management? How hands-on. That must keep you busy." Emma noticed. She was smart, perceptive, old enough to understand subtext. "Why does Mrs. Hendricks talk to you like that?" she'd asked one evening. "Like what, honey?" "Like she's better than you." I'd considered my answer carefully. Some people measure worth by appearances. But we know better, don't we? Emma had nodded, but I could see it bothered her. Patricia ramped up over the following months. She organized a neighborhood beautification committee and left a flyer on my door suggesting I might want to invest in professional landscaping. She started a group chat for Meadowbrook homeowners that specifically excluded renters. And me, though I own my house outright. I let it roll off. I'd dealt with worse. I was busy managing 58 properties, raising a daughter, and living my life. Then came the HOA meeting. Our HOA met monthly in the community center. I usually didn't attend. I paid my dues, kept my property maintained, and let the board handle the politics. But Emma had begged to come this time for a school project about local government. "Please, Mom. I need to observe a community meeting. It'll be boring, but it's for a grade." So we went. We sat in the back. Emma took notes on her tablet while the board discussed standard business, landscaping contracts, pool maintenance, a dispute about parking. Then Patricia raised her hand during open forum. "I want to address a concern that several neighbors have brought to my attention," she began, standing up. She was wearing a cream pantsuit like she was running for office. "We have residents in this community who simply don't maintain our standards." The board president, a tired-looking man named Marcus, sighed. "Patricia, we've discussed this. Everyone is in compliance with HOA rules." "I'm not talking about rules," Patricia continued. "I'm talking about image. Meadowbrook Estates was designed as a premier community. But when potential buyers drive through and see yards that look neglected, or cars that belong in a junkyard parked in driveways, it affects all our property values." She wasn't looking at me, but everyone knew who she meant. My yard was native desert landscaping. Low maintenance, water-wise, perfectly legal. My car was old but clean. Emma's hand found mine under the table. Furthermore, Patricia was warming to her topic now. "We need to consider whether everyone living here can actually afford to maintain properties to our community standards. Perhaps we need stricter enforcement, or even a review process for new residents." "We can't legally discriminate based on income," Marcus said flatly. "I'm not suggesting discrimination. I'm suggesting standards." Patricia's voice took on a razor edge. "She doesn't belong in this neighborhood. Look at her car. Look at her yard. She's bringing down property values." Emma flinched. I squeezed her hand gently and smiled. Then I pulled out my phone and made a note in my calendar. Schedule special HOA meeting. Time to educate the neighbors. The meeting ended shortly after. Patricia held court by the door, 3 other residents nodding along with her concerns. I took Emma home, made her favorite pasta, and helped with her homework. "Are you upset?" Emma asked before bed. "No, honey. I'm thoughtful." "What's the difference?" "Upset is emotional. Thoughtful is strategic." She grinned. "You're planning something." "I'm considering my options." The next morning, I called Marcus. We'd spoken a few times. He seemed decent, just overwhelmed by the position he'd been voluntold into. "I need to request a special meeting," I told him. "Listen, about Patricia's comments." "This isn't about Patricia." "Well, not directly. I need to discuss something with the board and the community. It's about property ownership and community standards." There was a pause. "Are you planning to sell?" "No, but there's information the community should have. Let's call it transparency." "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "Let me check the bylaws. I think I can schedule something for next month." "Next week would be better." "That's very short notice." "I understand, but I think people will want to attend this particular meeting." Something in my tone must have intrigued him. "All right, next Thursday, 7 p.m. I spent the next week preparing. I pulled documents, created presentations, consulted with my real estate attorney. I also reached out to my tenants in Meadowbrook Estates. Most were wonderful people. A young family with twins, a retired teacher, a couple of military families, a nurse working night shifts, a software engineer working remotely. Good people paying rent on time, maintaining their homes, living their lives. I asked each of them the same question. Have you experienced any issues with Patricia Hendricks or her beautification committee? The stories poured out. She'd left notes about toys in yards, made comments about work trucks parked on the street, organized a petition to ban clotheslines because they looked poverty-adjacent, her actual words. The nurse told me Patricia had complained to the HOA about her irregular schedule, suggesting that shift work was incompatible with a family community. I took notes. I documented everything. Thursday came. Emma asked if she could come. This might get uncomfortable, I warned her. I want to see you be strategic, she said with a grin that reminded me so much of Dorothy. The community center was packed. Patricia had apparently spread the word that important community standards would be discussed. She sat front and center, flanked by her supporters, wearing another power suit. Marcus called the meeting to order. We have a special presentation tonight from one of our residents. The floor is yours. I stood up. Emma gave me a thumbs up. Good evening. My name is Victoria Reyes. I've lived in Meadowbrook Estates for 3 years. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge something. I drive a 12-year-old Honda Civic. I wear jeans and t-shirts most days. I have native desert landscaping instead of a green lawn. Patricia smiled smugly, thinking I was about to apologize or announce I was leaving. These choices are intentional, I continued. The car is paid off and reliable. The clothes are practical for my work. The landscaping is environmentally responsible and requires minimal water in our desert climate. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation. But let's talk about what really matters in a community: ownership, investment, and commitment. The slide showed a map of Meadowbrook Estates with 14 houses highlighted in blue. These are the properties owned by Skyline Property Management, I said. My company, which means I personally own 14 of the 27 houses in this community. 52%. The room went silent. Patricia's smile vanished. Over the past 3 years, I've invested over $2 million in renovations and improvements to these properties. New roofs, updated electrical, modern appliances, professional landscaping. I've placed quality tenants who pass background checks, have steady employment, and maintain their homes beautifully. I clicked to the next slide showing property values. In that same time period, property values in Meadowbrook Estates have increased by 18%. The neighborhood average in Scottsdale is 12%. We're outperforming the market by 50%. Marcus was leaning forward, suddenly very interested. Now, let's discuss community standards, I continued. At our last meeting, it was suggested that certain residents don't belong here. That old cars and native landscaping bring down property values. That we need stricter enforcement and review processes. I looked directly at Patricia. Her face had gone pale. I want to be clear about something. I don't believe in superficial standards. I believe in actual investment. I believe in treating people with respect regardless of what they drive or wear. I believe in sustainable practices like water-wise landscaping. And I believe in building a community where people feel welcome, not judged. I clicked to another slide showing the tenant complaints I'd documented. I've received multiple reports from my tenants about harassment, comments about their work schedules, complaints about children's toys in yards, a petition against clotheslines. These aren't community standards. This is snobbery masquerading as concern. Patricia stood up. This is ridiculous. I've been trying to maintain property values. By making people feel unwelcome? I interrupted. By suggesting that nurses who work night shifts don't belong in a family community? By shaming people for their cars and clothes? I never. You did. And I have documentation. Marcus cleared his throat. Ms. Reyes, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing actual community standards, I said. Standards based on maintenance, respect, and inclusion. I'm proposing that we amend our HOA bylaws to explicitly prohibit harassment of residents based on appearance, income, or profession. And I'm proposing that anyone who can't abide by these standards might want to consider whether they're in the right community. I clicked to my final slide. I'm also proposing to buy more properties in Meadowbrook Estates as they become available. My goal is to make this the best managed, most welcoming community in Scottsdale. A place where people are judged by how they treat their neighbors, not by what they drive. I sat down. The room erupted in conversation. One of my tenants, the retired teacher, stood up. I want to say something. Ms. Reyes has been nothing but professional and fair. When my water heater broke at midnight, she had someone there within 2 hours. When I was short on rent last year due to medical bills, she worked out a payment plan. She's exactly the kind of landlord and neighbor we need. Another tenant echoed similar sentiments. Then a homeowner I didn't know stood up. I live next to one of Ms. Reyes's properties. The transformation has been incredible. It was a foreclosure disaster, and now it's one of the nicest houses on the block. My property value went up because of her investment. Patricia was shrinking in her seat. Marcus looked at the board members, then at me. I think we need to put this to a community vote. All in favor of amending our bylaws to include anti-harassment provisions. Nearly every hand went up. Motion passes. Marcus made a note. Ms. Reyes, thank you for your presentation. I think we all learned something tonight. After the meeting, several neighbors approached me to apologize for not speaking up sooner. Others wanted to know if I had any properties coming available. Apparently word spread fast about good landlords. Patricia left quickly, her supporters scattered. 2 weeks later, I got a call from the small-time landlord who owned Patricia's rental house. He wanted to sell. Was I interested? I smiled. Let me make you an offer. A month after that, Patricia gave notice. She was moving to a different neighborhood, somewhere her BMW would be more appreciated. The day she moved out, Emma and I were sitting on our front porch. My old Honda was in the driveway. My native plants were blooming with spring rains. Mom, Emma said thoughtfully, when I grow up, I want to be like you. A property manager? No. Someone who doesn't apologize for being herself. I pulled her close. Deal. But maybe drive a nicer car than me. She laughed. Maybe I'll get you a nicer car. This one runs fine. I know. That's not really the point though, is it? No, I agreed, thinking of Dorothy's letter about not apologizing for success. It's really not. 6 months later, Meadowbrook Estates won a Scottsdale Community Award for environmental stewardship. All that native landscaping I'd been installing. Marcus framed the certificate and hung it in the community center. Under it, someone had written, "Community standards, be kind. Maintain your property. Mind your own business." I'd suggested that last one. Emma thought it was perfect. I owned 15 houses in Meadowbrook Estates now. Patricia's former rental made a nice addition to my portfolio. I renovated it and rented it to a lovely family with 3 kids and a very old pickup truck. They fit in perfectly.